Uh, Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I am George Szamuely, and with us today is, of course, co-host Peter Lavelle, one of the founders of the Gaggle, and our special guest is Hans Mahncke, who is one of the world's leading experts on all of the ins and outs of RussiaGate. So anyone who follows this Twitter feed will every day find out fascinating details and all kinds of intricacies from all the innumerable documents that have emerged. So we're really very lucky to have him here today. So let me just start off in very general terms. We start off in 2016. We have CrowdStrike announces in June that the DNC server has been hacked. July, WikiLeaks begins publishing the DNC emails. And then at the end of July, the FBI launches Operation Crossfire Hurricane. So first of all, how did this come about? Why did the FBI do
this? It's sort of a very interesting situation where you had a lot of events all kind of happening at the same time. And clearly something was going on before July 31st, the sort of the official start date. So we had the Page situation, Carter Page. So there was an investigation on him in the FBI in New York. You had the Steele activity. So we know the first Steele report is dated June of 2016. So there was something going on there. I always sort of point to Robbie Mook, who was Hillary's campaign manager. I'm not sure what the exact role there was of this, or whether this is just sort of some coincidence or whatever, but he went on CNN on July 24th, 2016, and he basically said the Russians hacked the DNC and they dumped all this stuff, and they did it to help Trump, and they want Trump to win, which is the exact narrative which we've then sort of seen play out over the past few years. So it's almost as if he kind of previewed, here's what we're going to do over the next few months, and then it became a few years.
The interesting thing is, too, just to kind of add to that, is that if you read the reporting, the book Shattered on the Clinton campaign, again, we have Mr. Mook involved here, is that as soon as they realized that they had lost, they blamed the Russians. It was this. I'm just kind of backing up what you're saying there. I mean, this was something that it was on the whiteboard. Okay, on the whiteboard, they could, let's pick on this one here, because it has traction. I mean, look at every character in Hollywood. I mean, obviously the Russians did it by default here. Okay, but Robbie Mook, his role in this here is a lot more deeper than I think a lot of people realize here. I'm sorry, Hans.
No, not at all. I very much agree. And especially if you look at that clip, and I have it on my Twitter, I kind of pulled it off. This was on CNN. So this is July 24th. It's just 17 or 18 seconds or something like that. But those 18 seconds kind of summarize the entire narrative. So how would this guy have known a week ahead of time that this is going to be the narrative? So I completely agree. Now, I think the overall plan at that time on the part of the Clinton campaign wasn't this this whole big thing that we've seen play out. I think it was more narrow. What I think they wanted to do is they wanted to get the FBI to investigate Trump and make it all sound very bad, and then they wanted that to be announced in October. And then that would have been the kill shot, like, oh, Trump might be a Russian agent. Look, the FBI is even investigating, that sort of thing. And then, of course, that didn't quite happen because, strangely, Peter Strzok kind of held back. There's some communications that have come out since where, he's not he didn't go out and leak that bit of information. And then, of course, there's the New York Times piece when this was supposed to have come out. I think this was October 31st. The one that Hillary was so disappointed about, because in fact they said, well, there's probably nothing there. That's what the New York Times said at the time. This is a week before the election. So I think that plan didn't quite work out the way they wanted it to. And then they kind of re-engineered the plan right after the election to blame everything on Trump. But see, coming back to the,
That's really. Can we just back up a little bit, because we're talking about, say, July 31st, 2016. Peter Strzok goes to London. And he goes to London for a bizarre reason, because this young campaign worker, George Papadopoulos, has drinks with the Australian High Commissioner, Alexander Downer, and they have a drunken conversation, and suddenly that's enough to get Peter Strzok fly to London. And how did that come about?
Well, no, that's exactly right. So this is the part where, so my theory on this is, and I've probably looked into Papadopoulos more than probably anyone. So my theory on that is that part is actually a coincidence. That was not planned. That just kind of happened. But of course, it gave the people who were planning it a great excuse to say, hey, there's something here that's really going on. And those people like Strzok, who probably realized it's nothing, probably kind of held back and said, well, let's run with it anyway. So what happened there is that, July 24th, remember, is when Mahncke was on CNN sort of proclaiming this is what's happening. This was late at night during the DNC during the Democratic Convention in 2016. So this would have been the morning in London on the 25th. So, which is where Alexander Downer was. And Downer is the guy who spoke to Papadopoulos a few months earlier. And apparently Papadopoulos sort of bragging about his connections with Russia or whatever. So Downer then kind of must have thought, oh my God, what this Papadopoulos guy said, it's true, because there's Mahncke saying it. And it is a sort of, it's a weird coincidence, in my view anyway, that's what happened. So the very next day, 26th, is when Downer goes to the US Embassy. He bypasses all the protocols. He bypasses, his own government and so on, and says, hey guys, I need to tell you something. There was this Trump guy here 2 months ago who was saying about Russia and his connections with Russia, and there was a suggestion of a suggestion. That's the term that was used. Suggestion of a suggestion that there was some deal between the Trump campaign and Russia. I just thought I'd let you guys know. So this is on the 26th, and that's what triggered Strzok to fly to London and all that kind of stuff. So I've known of Alexander Downer since I was a kid. I spent a lot of time in Australia. He's a big guy there. He was a big guy in the 90s over there. He became foreign minister. I mean, this is a very, very serious person. The idea that he was somehow involved in a Clinton dirty trick, whatever, I don't buy it. I think the guy watched CNN. He thought, oh my goodness, what this Papadopoulos guy said, I thought it was a joke, but look, this could be real. Let me go and tell the Americans about it. So I think that's what happened on that side of things.
Well, that sounds so circumstantial. It's plausible, I suppose. But I agree with what you said. It started out as something very, very narrow. And they got their hooks into Page, into Papadopoulos, and they just milked it for all it was worth, okay? Because they were in search. It was an investigation in search of an investigation. And I think because there was no real predicate there. Oh, bar talk? Okay, all right, okay. That's like the secondary source for Steele saying, well, it was just talking with my friends and my girlfriend, and we made up all of these things or surmised these things for the report. No, I agree with you. I think it was very narrow, and they clung on to anything that they could. We see that how the FISA abuse. Okay, I mean, all of this stuff was so terribly thin. So thin. And once you get something, then you can add on to it. I mean, I think Peter Strzok just thought, this is an opportunity, why let it go? I mean, even the Flynn story, it's an opportunity, why not explore it, okay? And embellish it as you go on.
I completely agree. I would say that there was this very short window of time, say between July 26th is when Downer went to the U.S. Embassy, and 31st is when they started the investigation, and then I think on the 1st or 2nd of August is when Strzok actually got on a plane and flew out to London. So in that very short space of time, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they might have thought, people like Strzok, we better check it out. But one thing is sure as well, as soon as Strzok was in London and spoke to Downer, which he did, and we know that he did. Unfortunately, we don't have the interview notes. We just know that he spoke to Downer, and he also spoke to a colleague of Downer's called Erica Thompson. As soon as that happened, Strzok knew there was no there, because nothing fit. So for instance, Papadopoulos was talking about Hillary's emails, the 30,000 deleted emails. The ones that were obviously uncovered in July were the DNC ones, completely different emails. There's also a huge timeline problem. Papadopoulos met Downer on May 10th. But these emails hadn't even been hacked by that point. I mean, if you go into WikiLeaks, if you look at that DNC dump, there's emails in there. Most of the emails, in fact, are from after May 10th. So in effect, what they're saying is Papadopoulos kind of knew about emails that hadn't even been written yet. And it's completely ludicrous. So sort of August 2nd or whenever that interview was between Strzok and Downer, Strzok knew that this is going nowhere. So it should have ended at that point, and obviously it didn't. I completely agree with you, Peter, that at that point, Strzok was like,
Okay, so now we're getting to August. At what point does Carter Page appear on the FBI horizon? Was it because they were reading the Steele memoranda? I mean, why did they suddenly think of Carter Page as being this key link with the Russians?
Well, they had him on their radar before, back in March, April, because he was actually supposed to testify against a Russian, and he was always on that radar. And then they opened an investigation into him. I'm not entirely clear as to what the background there was, but the story in terms of that we've heard from the FBI side on this is that they thought that the Papadopoulos story is true, that somehow Papadopoulos knew all this stuff, but he wasn't a credible link to the Russians because he was just this junior guy. So they said, we looked around the campaign and we looked around to see who else could be that link. Oh, there's this guy who actually travels to Russia and so on. Remember, Papadopoulos had never traveled there. There's no connection there. So that's how allegedly they came to Page, because they were looking for the guy who kind of organized it all, and Papadopoulos is just the guy who overheard it all, which in and of itself is ludicrous. But
we have to remember too that Page was the only one that had some hands-on contact with Russia. I mean, he'd been there. I think he'd been in Moscow during the spring at a number of energy conferences. Okay, that's how he ended up being what 25% stakeholder in Rosneft. I mean, he's one of the richest men in the world. Okay.
But there was also that case in which that Carter Page was supposedly, there was an attempt by Russians to recruit him to work for the Russians, and so the FBI knew all about this, that was that he wasn't working for the Russians. I mean, they were trying to recruit him, and they kind of called him that's in the transcript. They called him a kind of a dimwit. I mean, or at least they had the Russians thinking that Carter Page is a dimwit. So the FBI knew about this.
But did the FBI know that he was an asset of the CIA at the time?
They knew in August because in August, when they started the investigation, not only on Papadopoulos but Page as well at that point, and then Manafort and Flynn after that. In fact, Manafort and Page were open at the same time, and Flynn came in about a week or two later. But when they opened, I guess they did their usual, there must be some process they go through when they check with the other agencies, do you know anything about this guy? Or, they just kind of dig into this guy. Anyway, they got a memo from the CIA saying, hey, he's one of our sources. So that's been around since August. The question now, of course, in kind of trying to unravel it all is, who knew of that? Who received that thing? And now I'm sure everyone says, "Oh no, I never saw that. I never got it. I never read it. That sort of thing." So the whole Kleinsmith.
It's so hard to believe. These are rigidly run organizations with a chain of command. Okay, I'm sorry. I find that really, really dubious, particularly with the sensitivity of looking at an opposition political campaign. I mean, if this was like, the Sicilian mafia or something, or, a Mexican drug cartel, that's one thing. But I mean, there was intent here to get involved in the political process.
Unfortunately, this brings to an end the first part of our discussion. And we're going to continue this very interesting discussion. And remember, like, share, and subscribe to The Gaggle. See you soon.
Thank you.